The rain fell in a steady rhythm, washing the blood from the cracked stones of the old road. Cale Riven stood still, hands shaking around the hilt of his sword. The sky was a dull gray, and smoke rose in thin trails from the nearby village. His boots were caked with mud and ash, and his eyes, once filled with fear, now burned with something sharper. Behind him, the elven captain spoke in a cold voice. "Clean it up. Move the bodies. Quickly." Cale didn't answer. He moved, because disobeying meant pain. Humans knew that. They always obeyed. The elves were taller, faster, stronger. They had magic. Humans had none. But Cale had something else. Something the elves never noticed. He remembered the way the villagers had looked at him. Not with hate, but with hope. They thought he might stop it. They were wrong. He couldn't stop anything. Not yet. The elves had ruled for over 300 years. When the Great War ended, they kept peace, at a price. Humans were allowed to live, but only if they served. In the cities, they worked. In the fields, they bled. In war, they died first. Cale had been trained as a soldier since he was 10. The elves liked obedient humans who followed orders. Cale followed them well, but not blindly. He listened. He watched. He remembered. "You there," snapped the captain, pointing at Cale. "Check the farmhouse." Cale nodded and walked across the muddy field. His fingers brushed the pendant beneath his tunic, an old iron circle with strange markings. He had found it weeks ago, buried deep under the ruins of a forgotten fort. It hummed when he held it. No one else knew. He had not told anyone, not even his unit. The farmhouse door creaked open. Inside, it was quiet. A broken table lay across the floor, and smoke still curled from the hearth. Cale stepped carefully, checking corners. A sound, soft, like cloth brushing wood, caught his attention. He turned quickly, sword raised. But it was only a child, a human boy, hiding behind a crate, wide eyes, full of terror. Cale lowered his weapon. "Go," Cale whispered. "Run, before they see you." The boy blinked, then fled through the back door, vanishing into the mist. Cale stood alone for a moment, heart pounding. He looked down at his sword, then at the iron pendant in his hand. Something was changing, not just in him, but everywhere. Humans were growing tired of chains, tired of fear. The elves had ruled through strength, but strength was not everything. As Cale stepped out of the farmhouse, the sky rumbled with distant thunder. He walked back toward the elven line, his face calm. No one noticed the way his hand brushed the pendant again, or the small spark that flashed in the air as he passed. Something was coming, and Cale was ready. The wind carried the smell of burnt wood and wet earth. Cale moved through the trees, quiet as a shadow. The forest was thick, the branches low and heavy with rain. Every step he took was careful. He had left the others behind for a reason. His mission, given by the elven captain, was simple: scout ahead and find the rebel hideout. Humans who had dared to rise up. Fools, they were called. Traitors. But Cale didn't think they were fools. He had heard whispers, stories told in low voices near cooking fires, tales of humans hiding in the mountains, gathering weapons, learning old skills. The elves laughed at these stories, calling them lies. Cale listened. He believed. The pendant around his neck grew warm as he walked deeper into the woods. It pulsed like a heartbeat. It never did that near elves, only out here, where the trees grew older than the city walls, and the ground remembered forgotten names. A noise to his left made him stop. He crouched, hand on his sword. A squirrel darted through the underbrush. Cale let out a breath and kept moving. After an hour, he found it. Not the rebel camp, but something else. An old stone door, half covered in moss, built into the side of a hill. The markings on it matched the ones on his pendant. He touched the stone. It clicked softly. The door opened. Inside, the air was cool and still. The hallway sloped down, lit by faint blue light that came from the walls. Cale walked slowly, his footsteps echoing. At the end of the hall stood a large room, filled with stone carvings and strange tools. In the center sat a table. On it, a metal box. Cale stepped forward and opened it. Inside was a metal band, like a bracelet, covered in runes. When he touched it, a light flashed, not blinding, but clear and strong. his mind filled with images, machines, battles, maps, memories that were not his. He dropped to one knee, dizzy. When the light faded, he stood up. His hand shook, but he felt stronger. This was old human magic, not spells like the elves used. This was something else. Knowledge, memory, power from the past. He took the band and placed it in his pouch. Then he heard voices. "He went this way," said someone. An elf. Cale slipped out the back of the chamber and into the trees. He didn't run. Not yet. He had seen enough. The elves thought they had broken humans long ago. They were wrong. Cale would go back, not to obey, but to prepare. Something had started in him. A fire, small, but growing. He would find the rebels. He would learn more. He would become something they never expected. Not just a soldier. A spark, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of the end for the Elven rule. Cale had not returned to the Elven camp. Instead, he made his way through the wilds, heading north toward the rebel hideout. The journey was long, but he moved with purpose, his mind racing with thoughts of the strange magic he had discovered. Every now and then, he felt the pendant against his skin, pulsing as if it recognized his growing resolve. He had been part of the elves' army for so long, following orders, never questioning. But now something had changed. That box, the band, the flashes of knowledge, it was as if an old forgotten power was waking within him. And the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. The humans were not weak. They were just untapped, their potential buried beneath centuries of oppression. The forest began to thin, the trees growing fewer as Cale climbed higher into the mountains. The air grew colder, and the path became rougher. He stumbled over rocks and tree roots, but he never slowed. Deep in his mind, he knew he couldn't turn back. Not now. After 2 days of travel, he reached the base of a cliff. At its foot, a small cave entrance was hidden behind a thicket of branches and bushes. Cale pushed the branches aside and stepped into the dark, cool interior. The air inside smelled of damp stone and earth. A low fire flickered at the far end, where a few humans sat, talking in hushed tones. "Who goes there?" one of them asked, a man with a scar running down his cheek. Cale stepped forward, his hand raised. "Cale Riven, I need to speak to your leader." The man eyed him suspiciously, but motioned for him to wait. Soon, another figure appeared from the shadows, a woman, tall and strong, her face marked with battle scars. Her gaze was sharp, like a hawk's. "You're human," she said, her voice low. "Why are you here?" Cale swallowed. I'm not here to fight," he said quickly. "I'm here to help. I've seen the magic, the old magic. I have a way to end this, to end their rule." The woman studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Come, we'll talk." They led him deeper into the cave, where a group of rebels had gathered around a large table. Maps and plans were spread across it. Cale's eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of the men and women who had come to challenge the elves. "We've heard rumors," the woman said, "but if you're telling the truth, you're more than just a soldier. You're holding something ancient." Cale nodded, pulling the metal band from his pouch. He placed it on the table. "This," he said quietly, "is only the beginning. It's a key to something more, something the elves have forgotten. The magic they fear." The room fell silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. Cale could feel the weight of their gazes on him, the hope that flickered in their eyes, hope that had been extinguished long ago. The woman looked at him again, a spark of something in her expression. "Then let's see if your magic is enough to change the world." Cale stood tall. The fire in him, the one that had started with a single ember, was now a growing flame. He had found the spark, and now it was time to light the blaze. The cave was filled with murmurs, the air thick with anticipation. Cale stood at the center, the metal band now resting on the table, its strange glow casting faint shadows across the faces of the rebels. The woman, whose name Cale had learned was Miren, stepped forward, her eyes narrowed in thought. "You're certain this will work?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with a hint of doubt. Cale nodded. "It has to. This magic is older than the elves, older than any kingdom. It's power they never understood. If we can unlock it, we can turn the tide." The rebels exchanged looks. There was fear in their eyes, but also something more, a spark of hope, long buried beneath years of oppression. "We'll need a plan," Marin said, her voice stronger now. "The elves are everywhere. We can't just march in and expect them to fall." Kale ran his fingers over the metal band, its surface cool under his touch. "We don't need to fight them in their strength. We fight in theirs, by taking what they fear." He could feel the weight of their stares. They were all waiting for him to explain, to give them a direction. The pressure mounted, but Kale didn't flinch. He knew what he had to do. "We'll strike at their leaders," he said quietly. "The ones who have ruled over us. They're not invincible. We take out the elves' command, their magic, and the rest will fall." Marin frowned. "The High Council," she murmured. "But how do we even get close? They stay locked in their citadel, surrounded by their guards." Kale looked at her, a faint glint in his eyes. "We don't go to them. We make them come to us." The room grew silent as the rebels tried to piece together what he meant. Kale continued, his voice steady. "The High Council wants to keep control, to keep us under their thumb. They've made their enemies among humans clear. We need to show them that we're not afraid anymore. We'll send a message." He could see them start to understand. The plan was risky, dangerous even, but it was their only chance. "We'll use the magic," Kale said. "We use the band. I'll wear it. Let it guide me. When the time is right, I'll release it." "And that will get their attention?" one of the rebels asked. "It'll do more than that," Kale replied. "It'll show them we're no longer just soldiers. We're the spark of something they can't control." The room hummed with energy as the rebels began to gather around, discussing the details, preparing for what was to come. Kale could see the fear still in their eyes, but it was mixed with something else, something he hadn't seen before. Confidence. Kale felt the magic stirring inside him. It was strange, like a fire waking in his veins. The pendant around his neck pulsed once more, and he could feel the power it held. It was ancient, forgotten, but alive. They would have to move quickly. The elves wouldn't sit idly by. But for the first time in his life, Kale didn't feel like just a soldier. He felt like something more, something that couldn't be put out. The fire was growing, and he was ready to let it burn. The plan was set. The time had come. Kale stood at the entrance of the cave, watching as the rebels gathered their things, preparing for the raid. He could feel the tension in the air, a heavy weight that pressed down on them all. They were about to do something no one had dared to do in centuries, strike directly at the heart of Elven power. Marin stood beside him, her face serious. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice low. "The council won't just stand by. Once they know we're coming, they'll send everything they have." Kale nodded. "I know, but this is the only way. We can't keep hiding in the shadows. We need to show them that we're not afraid anymore." He could see the doubt in her eyes, but there was something else too. Determination, the same fire he had felt growing inside him. They were all in this together now. "We'll move quickly," Kale continued. "The band will guide me. Once we're close enough to their citadel, I'll use it. The magic will do the rest." Marin hesitated, then nodded. "All right. We're with you." The group began to move out, their footsteps quiet but purposeful. The sky was dark, the moon barely visible through the clouds. The world felt still, as though it were holding its breath. Kale led the way, his eyes scanning the path ahead. He could hear the distant sounds of the elven forces moving in the opposite direction, unaware of the danger that was creeping closer. As they neared the citadel, the air grew colder. Kale could feel the magic in the pendant, pulsing softly against his skin. He had no idea how it would work, but he trusted it. This was no ordinary relic. It was something far older, something forgotten by even the elves. They reached the outer wall of the citadel just before dawn. The rebels were tense, crouching low behind rocks and trees, waiting for Kale's signal. The citadel loomed before them, its high walls and tall towers casting long shadows in the early morning light. Kale took a deep breath. It was time. He stepped forward, the pendant glowing faintly as he placed it in his palm. The magic hummed louder now, and he felt a sudden surge of power, like fire racing through his veins. The ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble, and he could see the distant flicker of light from within the citadel's walls. Kale closed his eyes, focusing on the magic. He could feel the presence of the elves inside, strong, ancient, and sure of their power. But that power was nothing compared to what he now carried within him. The pendant flared, a brilliant light shooting up into the sky. The ground shook, and the walls of the citadel seemed to crack, sending echoes through the air. "Now!" Kale shouted. The rebels surged forward, weapons raised, charging toward the walls. The elves were scrambling now, trying to respond, but the magic had already done its work. The citadel's defenses were weakening, and for the first time in centuries, the elves were on the defensive. Kale moved with them, the fire inside him burning bright. The magic had given them a chance. Now, they had to take it. As the first rebel climbed the wall, Kale looked back once, catching Myron's eyes. They had done it. They had struck the first blow. And there was no turning back now. The fire had begun, and it would burn until the world changed. The citadel was in chaos. The ground shook with the force of Kale's magic, and the walls that had stood for centuries now cracked and crumbled. The rebels had breached the outer defenses, and the elves inside scrambled to regroup. But Kale knew this was only the beginning. The High Council, the rulers of the elves, would not be so easily defeated. Kale moved quickly, leading a small group of rebels through the narrowing corridors of the citadel. His heart pounded in his chest, but it was not fear he felt. It was the rush of purpose, of knowing that they were finally fighting back. The elves had always looked down on humans, but now it was the humans who held the power. The walls around them were lined with old elven symbols, runes that hummed faintly with magic. Kale could feel the strength of the magic, a deep, ancient power that had kept the elves in control for so long. But now, it was fading. "We're getting close," Kale muttered. "Stay alert." The rebels nodded, moving silently through the halls. They had planned for this moment, but Kale knew there was no way to predict what would happen next. The council would have their own defenses, their own magic, and they would not give up their power without a fight. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a group of elven guards. The elves were fast, faster than any human. But the rebels had the element of surprise. Before the guards could react, the rebels struck. Swords clashed against shields, and the sound of battle filled the air. Kale fought with precision, his movements sharp and quick. The magic in his pendant flared with each swing of his sword, and he could feel the power coursing through him. The elves fought back fiercely, but they were not prepared for the strength of the rebels. They had underestimated them, just as they had underestimated Kale. "Push forward," Kale shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of the battle. "We need to reach the council chambers." The rebels pressed on, cutting down the remaining guards and pushing deeper into the citadel. The corridors became narrower, the air thicker with the scent of magic and smoke. Kale could feel the presence of the High Council drawing closer. He knew they were waiting for him, ready to defend their throne. They reached the large doors of the council chamber, their final obstacle. Kale raised his hand, the pendant glowing brightly in the darkened hallway. "Get ready," he said quietly. "This is it." With a forceful push, the doors flew open. Inside, the High Council sat at a long stone table, their eyes cold and calculating. The room was filled with an oppressive silence as the elves stared at the humans who had dared to challenge them. "So it has come to this," one of the council members said, his voice smooth, but filled with venom. "You think you can overthrow us? You, who are nothing more than animals to us." Kale stepped forward, the power of the pendant humming within him. "We are not animals, we are humans, and we have had enough of being your slaves." The council members stood, their eyes narrowing as they prepared for the battle that was about to unfold. Kale knew this was their last chance. The fire had started, and it would burn until the elves were no more. "Fight!" Kale shouted, and the room erupted into chaos. The battle inside the council chamber was chaos. The air crackled with magic, the sound of clashing swords, and shouted orders filling the room. Kale felt the power of the pendant surge within him, strengthening his every move. He had never felt anything like it before, this strange ancient magic that was now a part of him. He swung his sword, cutting down one of the elven guards, his eyes never leaving the High Council members at the far end of the room. "To me," Kale shouted to the rebels. "Don't let them regroup." The rebels fought with everything they had, But the elves were not easily defeated. Their magic was powerful, and their skill with weapons unmatched. Cale could see the elves' council members standing at the far end of the room, each one calm and composed, as if they were watching the storm unfold around them with indifference. The room was huge, its stone walls covered with intricate carvings, but now they were lost in the heat of battle. Cale fought with a clear purpose in mind. The council had ruled for too long, oppressing humans and using their magic to keep them in chains. Now it was their turn to feel the power of those they had once crushed. Myren was by his side, her blade flashing as she cut down an elf who tried to approach him. "We're almost there," she called, but Cale could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The fight had taken its toll on everyone, but they couldn't stop now. They had come too far. One of the council members, a tall elf with silver hair, stepped forward, raising his hands. The air in the room seemed to grow heavy, and the temperature dropped. "You fools think you can defeat us," he sneered. "We are the rulers of this world. Your rebellion is nothing." Cale met his gaze. "You were never the rulers. You were just the ones who kept everyone else down." With a single motion, the elf conjured a blast of magic that shot across the room toward Cale. He felt the force of it, but at the last moment, he lifted his sword, the pendant glowing brightly in his hand. The magic collided with the sword, and for a moment, there was a blinding flash of light. When the light faded, the elf stood frozen in place, his magic having been absorbed by the sword and the pendant's power. Cale's heart raced as he saw the change. The magic had worked, he had deflected the attack, and now the elf was vulnerable. "Finish it!" Cale shouted to the rebels. The room exploded with movement as the rebels surged forward, fighting with renewed strength. The elf with the silver hair fell, his power no longer enough to protect him. One by one, the other council members tried to fight back, but the tide of the battle had turned. They had underestimated the power of the humans, just as they had underestimated Cale. The last council member, a female elf with sharp features, glared at Cale with fury. "You think you've won," she hissed, but her voice shook. Cale stepped forward, holding the pendant in front of him. "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "This is the end." With one final strike, the last of the council members fell. The battle was over. The council was no more. Cale looked around the room, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rebels were victorious, but there was no time to celebrate. The fire that had started in him, the fire that had burned through the citadel and the council, was only just beginning. They had won today, but the war was far from over, and Cale knew that the real fight was still ahead. The citadel lay in ruins. The once mighty fortress of the elves, the symbol of their long reign, was now shattered. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the jagged stone walls, casting long shadows across the battlefield. Silence had fallen, broken only by the heavy breaths of the rebels as they surveyed the wreckage. Cale stood in the center of the council chamber, his sword still gripped tightly in his hand. Though the battle had long since ended, his mind raced, but his body felt heavy with exhaustion. The pendant, now dim and quiet in his palm, had drained much of its magic. The force of the battle, the weight of the responsibility, it had all taken its toll. Myren approached him, her face smeared with dirt and blood, but her eyes were clear. She gave him a nod, her expression unreadable. "We did it," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Cale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around at the rebels, some of whom were tending to the wounded, while others moved through the wreckage, making sure that the elves had been driven from the citadel. The elves who had once stood as rulers, watching over humans with contempt, were no longer in control. It was hard to believe that it was real. "We did," he said finally, his voice low. There was still so much to be done. The battle may have been won, but the war had just begun. The elves might have lost their council, but they were not a broken people. Cale knew they would fight to reclaim their lost power. It would take time, maybe more time than they had, but the humans now had a chance. They were free, and they could begin to rebuild, to create a new world. The rebels gathered around Cale, and he could see the spark of hope in their eyes. They had fought not only for survival, but for a future where they were no longer slaves. They had proven to themselves and to the elves that they were capable of greatness. Cale was no longer just a soldier, he was a symbol of change. "What now?" one of the rebels asked, looking to Kale for answers. Kale took a deep breath, the weight of leadership settling on him. "We rebuild. We unite the humans, the rebels, and anyone who wants to fight for a world where no one is forced to live in fear. We can't rest now. The elves may have lost their council, but they still hold power in the world. We need to be ready." Myren stepped forward, her expression resolute. "We'll stand with you, Kale. We'll fight until the last of the elves are driven from this land." Kale nodded, his heart heavy but full of resolve. The fight was far from over, but he knew they had the strength to win. The fire that had started in him, the fire that had burned through the citadel, would keep burning. It would light the way for all those who had been oppressed, and it would lead them toward a new dawn. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Kale looked out over the battlefield. The smoke still lingered in the air, but it was no longer a sign of destruction. It was a sign of something new, something powerful. Humanity had been tested, and they had emerged victorious. The age of elves was ending, and the age of humans was just beginning.